in Colossians chapter 3. So we were discussing how we got to where we're at, that it's in our family settings that we ought to be able to see true Christianity lived out. And I don't mean to sound like I'm overreacting, but I think it's something dreadfully wrong when we expect the opposite. I understand that when we're with our family, our poor character will be seen for what it is at times, but we deal with it, and we deal with it seriously. We do not want to presume upon our family and just say, well, that's just the way it is, and other people should never, see any bad sign of our bad character, which I understand. We don't want that out there either, but we ought to be especially prioritizing our time with our family, because that's where we ought to demonstrate genuine Christianity. And we have so many self-help materials out there, so many resources for family and family improvement, and so much of it seems to be focused on you want to have a happy and fulfilled life, and you want your family life to be better and happy and encouraged. Of course we do, but that's not the main motive. The main motive is because of our accountability before God, and certainly the proving grounds, the testing grounds could be or should be to some degree in our family settings. Where we're at, we're guarded there as well, especially between the husband and wife, and then the parents with the children and the children with the parents. We expect a high degree of maturity and growing in our Christianity to be seen in our families. And there's where we start. So a husband and wife having issues there, the issues aren't primarily first just between the husband and wife. The issue is between the husband and God, and the wife and God, and then to each other. And I that ought to be clear to us. The reason there's conflict in marriage is because there's something wrong in our relationship with the Lord himself. And I believe, if ever challenged, I could demonstrate that in any situation that any of us ever comes across in an issue in the marriage, because it would be the wife would say, but my husband is not loving. Yeah, but then what is your response before God supposed to be, not with your husband? Because it's easy to be reactionary. Well, my spouse isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're not fulfilling their responsibilities, but we're not. I know this doesn't sound gracious, but by and large in our faith, we're not allowed to focus on that. We'll sense it. We have to live with it. It's not like we deny reality. I understand all that, but what is our response to it? And the scripture is very clear. There's not a lot of them out there, because the answer is rather simplistic as far as the topic is concerned, how a wife is supposed to be responding to a husband who's not necessarily on track with what he ought to be, especially in obedience to the word, and then how a husband is supposed to deal with his wife and what he's not allowed to do or supposed to do as far as his wife is concerned, and the whole area of her reverencing him and submitting to him. Both of these are our first primary focus is before the Lord. Husband looking to the Lord. Do I love my wife? Am I loving my wife as I ought to, as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her? That's where my motivation is first, and then to my wife. And I ought to be loving. Of course we should. And will it make for a much better husband and wife and ultimate family relationship? Absolutely it will. It won't mean that all the challenges will go away, or if a husband and wife have a wonderful relationship, the children will just be angelic. We understand that's not necessarily true either, but it certainly will be, practically speaking, better, which we desire. But this is why I want to bring it back to them. What is our motive in this? Our motive is our responsibility before the Lord. Pretty much guarantee, again, one way or another, if there's a conflict in a family, we could trace it back to things that are already covered in Colossians that won't likely show up in most family counseling resources that are out there. You go back, it's a character issue, our character, who and what we actually are before God, and whether or not we sense the responsibility, or the degree we sense the responsibility of our being obedient before the Lord, of our actual faith in the things that have all been laid out, because so many of the conflicts we end up facing could also be traced back to a faith issue. I just don't believe it. I just don't trust it, would be the case. This is not directly tied to this, but I think I can pull one point out of it. I was listening to a question and answer time, just looking for something to keep my mind going Q&A time with a pastor's conference some years back, and one of the questions at the end of this pastor's conference, they were asking the men on the panel this question it's often asked, and they said, if you, as you are now, could go back and talk to your younger self, what counsel would you give yourself? And I know most of the time I weary at questions like that, but and I thought, okay, well, how would I answer it if I could go back? And there were some interesting answers that they gave, but my answer to that would be, I would go back to my younger self and say, stay with exactly what you've been told and you're focused on, and actually trust God's design and God's control and all these things. Not that I didn't, but there was a frustration where sometimes there's so much of the self-doubt, which is the problem. Too much focus on self will automatically cause doubt. But truly trust and don't fret so much about the various responses that are coming out there. Stay focused on the one little statement that was given to me in my ordination Bible. Preach the word. That was it. That was the focus. That was a good summary, I think, of the counsel of Paul to Timothy. Preach the word. Of course, there was much more to it. No matter if it's popular or if it's unpopular, that's my loose handling of that text. But just stay focused on that and trust God with the results. Actually do that. Don't be too concerned about anything else. And I tie it all the way back around. That's the same thing in our families, because we oftentimes respond so instinctively in families rather than in faith. And there's a danger in responding instinctively, because something irritates me, I get angry. But that's not an ideal approach to something like that. Or others respond in an angry fashion, and then we all get angry, and everyone starts to take their posturing with each other about who needs to be doing their responsibilities, rather than you and I looking on what our responsibilities are supposed to be. I know I sound like I'm rambling, but I'm just trying to get back to the core point that it's a place to demonstrate whether or not we're the real deal. And if anyone's going to see where we're actually struggling, it's going to be in our families. And our goal should not be just to presume upon them. Our goal should be to then get our act together, be submissive and truly obedient, and be a great demonstration of what it actually means to be a Christian to our families, whether or not the rest of the world ever sees it. At the very least, our families, those closest to us, even our closest friends, should know that we are the real deal. This is no facade. We're not pretending anything. So when we get to this, we've already dealt with the wives and their responsibilities to their husbands. And again, wives submit and respect, the Old English word, reverence their husbands because of the Lord first, and then their husbands secondarily, because it's before the Lord it is very pleasing. Then we were down to point 2. I'd already introduced it there toward the bottom of page 31. But before we do that, let's just read the context here. Verse 18. Wives, be subject to your husbands, as is fitting in the Lord. Another way that could be worded, it is fitting in the Lord, and that's why you do it. Husbands, love your wives, and do not be embittered against them. Again, a shorter context here, but very direct. Verse 20, children, be obedient to your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. There's your motive for it. Fathers, do not exasperate your children, so that they will not lose heart. Again, very short and to the point. This is one of the points I've made. There are not many texts that deal with family relationships. All kinds of things are pulled in quite often into family help resources, but there's not a lot of texts out there because it's rather straightforward. Even between the husband and wife, I know we have volumes written, and much of that built off of the psychology of this, of human relationships. And there's probably some value to some of that. But it still always comes back down to the simplistic, direct answers in the text. If one way or another, a conflict between a husband and wife can be traced back to a faith issue. Guaranteed. Do we actually trust what God said? Could a wife actually submit herself, that's the orderly, authoritative structure, under her husband, and actually trust God and his design in it? And most often, I know it just in my experience, wives that say they can't do it or refuse to do it, it's a faith issue. They just don't trust it. This man is not a leader. This man is not a spiritual leader. I can't trust this man or whatever, with all these things. And they come up with all these reasons to excuse themselves from a very direct command in Scripture to the wife. And they that volumes of information. So soon you have just about every wife out there that has some husband that's not ideal in some areas, has now excused herself from this responsibility. And the Scripture doesn't allow for that. Now we can say, well, what about? And then we end up spending so much time on the whatabouts that soon no one even ventures here anymore. Why would we ever bring it up? As though it's an oppressive thing to talk about a wife submitting to her husband. I didn't tell wives to submit to their husbands. Men didn't come up with this, as much as modern feminism would love to come up with something like this. And it's not stated, wives, submit to your husbands because the husbands are just better. They're smarter. They're more stable. None of that's ever spelled out in the text. So why do it? Because it's the Lord's order. I don't mean just his command. I mean, it's his order. It's his structure. Husbands, the same thing now over here. Love your wives. Why? Well, because they need it. Well, they likely do. But because I want a happy wife, happy life. No, that's not the main reason. Well, I want my family to be generally well structured, and we want a good home. Well, we do, but that's not the reason. We do it because you're told to, and it's a faith issue. And that's why the extreme opposite is given here. Love your wives and do not be embittered, is the New American Standard Translation here, against your wife. So we can certainly conclude that that is a common negative response of a husband. They become bitter against their wives. And oftentimes I've seen, at least again in my circumstances over the years, a lot of men who are very embittered against their wives, but their wife just thinks they're disinterested, or rather too passive and unmotivated, not realizing that a lot of these men can't stand their wives. They hate them. I had a man some years ago come into my office just crying. He was so frustrated with his wife many years ago. And he was so bitter against her. She didn't have a clue. She thought, no, he's not the most motivated guy, but he's pretty nice to me. Because he just about hated her because of the stress she was putting on him. But he figured if I told her, it's only going to get worse. So my counsel to him wasn't, well, let's bring in your wife, let's get her act together, and then you'll be fine. I focused on him. Regardless of any of these circumstances, do you love your wife? And could you say that before God, who sees and knows all? Before you tell me, yeah, I love my wife, what would you say if God was right here in the room with us, which of course he actually is? How would you respond? Do you truly cherish your wife? And it's so common for a man to say, but she just doesn't respect me, or she's just unpleasable. And they'll come up with all these things. And doesn't matter. You can throw all those things out. We still come back to the focus. You're told to do it regardless. You love your wife. You cherish your wife. Which again, as I reiterate constantly here, that I understand practically why I'll never have a very booming counseling ministry ever. I've done this consistently since I was young, and I almost always, almost 100%, have had people reject it. They just don't buy it. They don't believe it. They won't do it. They'll give me every reason why not, and they just get frustrated. I've had some get angry at me because I'm not coming up with something more clever for them to do, or some way to get out of it. All I can do is focus back on these simple texts. And again, I've seen clear indications of just the sheer disappointment with me as a counselor that there needs to be something else you can give me. I can give some anecdotal stuff, some things that I've learned over the years, and my relationship with Tammy, and then our parenting, lessons that we've learned over the years. But none of that's authoritative, and some of it, may or may not work for others. Even though volumes have been written on stuff like that, we still come back down to texts like this. So husbands, this is point 2. This is where we had ended last time. Husbands are to love their wives. And don't be embittered against them. That's it. Imagine having that's all the Colossians got in their family counseling. So what's he going to say between husbands and wife? We're having a lot of issues here. Let's hope we've got at least, a couple chapters given to this. What did he say? husbands thinking, well, what am I, to love my wife? There's got to be more to it than that. No, actually, no. No. You cherish your wife, and of course it's agape, love. It is a determined, reasoned, committed love. Even if the emotions aren't necessarily in line with it, you do it anyway. You cherish your wife, and make sure you do not ever allow yourself to grow bitter against them. Now, we might use other synonyms to help us with this. Be irritated with her. How often would a man say, well, I'm not bitter, but she does irritate me quite often? No, not allowed. Imagine that. Do not allow yourself to be irritated with her. Now, is that an odd thing to think of? Men don't get irritated with their wives. Of course they will. Of course they do. And wives get irritated with their husbands. Of course they do. But are we allowed to? No. The problem with irritations like that and how they truly then grow into bitterness is we focus on it. I mean, if I don't want to do this, but I don't want you to do it seriously, but if you stop and think, what is it about someone that could irritate me? Something they do. Something that they do. Let's say they click their fingernails. I'm not trying to do something deliberately irritating, but let's say they just have a habit of doing that. Because this often comes up, little trivial things like this that we think, well, it's actually bigger if you're the one suffering from this. No, it's not. It's trivial. We're like little children with the things we allow to bother us. Well, they click their nails. Well, you can get past that. It's your focusing on it that makes it so bad. Yes, it irritates you, but does it have to irritate you? Imagine that if somebody said, oh, no, it's unbearable, and then someday some other nation overtakes the United States and you're brought into a prison camp and they need to get information out of you, so they're going to torture you, and their method is going to be clicking their nails. You're going to, no. Okay, maybe that's an extreme example, but I'm just trying to demonstrate, no, it's definitely something we can get past. We can. I mean, we laugh at it, but it's amazing how people in America, well, it just drives me crazy. I can't take it anymore. Well, let's put it to a more serious example and find out, no, actually, that's not the case. So let's stop playing these games, because they're not games at all. They're detrimental to a family situation, and they are disobedient before the Lord who designed the whole thing. It's kind of a marvel in a very negative sense how many people, even in our churches, act as though God really messed it up in the structure of the family. He didn't get it right. And with all the endless complaints we have, of all the issues that we have, and maybe a husband and wife have a great relationship, but then it's like, the children thou gavest us. Why did you do this? Where did they come from? It's just so easy to be that way. Of course, we're going to get challenging circumstances. You're going to get two imperfect people together in the closest relationship known this side of eternity. In a marriage, there's going to be weaknesses in that, but it's our response to them that makes a difference. I'm just doing part of my study later in Colossians here, but one of the conclusions I had at one point was our failures do not dictate our lives. It's our response to the failures that end up doing it. How do we respond to those failures, our own inconsistencies? So hopefully I've simplified this. A husband is to love his wife. That is a deliberate, determined, reasoned love that's being described there. He's to cherish her faithfully, live with her, lead and protect her, just to name a few of the things that a man ought to expect himself to do as far as his relationship, his loving relationship with his wife. Point A, the word for love here, agapao, and the verb, is more than an affectionate love. Hopefully it includes that, but one that is determined to care for the other. In its determination to care for the other, it is for their best and is exemplified by God, the Father, and the Son, is to give. Give, that John 3:16, one of the best examples. God loved, he gave. Ephesians 5:25-28, we've referenced and read already before, but a husband is to love his wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. That is no small example. Every man that's married ought to feel that weight of responsibility upon his shoulders. Do I love my wife like Christ loved the church? I wonder how many men ask themselves that. Do they? Or are they constantly, well, I could if she respected me more or cared for me more? No, doesn't work like that. Does Christ love the church even though we don't always respect him? Yeah, clearly. Clearly. Even though we neglect him in our thoughts and our priorities at times? Absolutely. So no man should put a price tag on it. He loves his wife, and his focus in that relationship is to give himself for her. No man would ever think, well, I sacrifice a lot for my wife and my family, and they don't appreciate it. Well, hopefully you do sacrifice for your wife and your family, but never look back and think they'd better appreciate it. Well, what a weak man. It's amazing to me how many men who love the idea of being masculine and strong to some degree. I'm rather determined. I've got a forceful, personality, at least internally. Not everybody sees it. And, men wanting to be men, but they're so weak when it comes to these fundamental things. What they can't take. It's just like men have lost perspective of what true manliness is. It's not just having a deep voice and being brutish in our behavior and loving to do rough things. That is likely part of masculinity. But so is it that he lovingly, tenderly, consistently gives himself for his wife. A manly man would never manhandle his wife, would never think of it, would never want his wife to ever see a angry man perspective back at her, would never imagine doing something like that, would treat her with absolutely, truly tender, loving care, as is often a phrase that's used, because he cherishes her. If he would never dream of allowing himself to be hurtful to her. And he's following that text there on the left there from 1 Peter 3, I think it's verse 7. Yes, that he lives with her according to science, as a science according to knowledge. He's studying it out, not because it's some philosophical project of his and he loves puzzles. He does it because he genuinely wants to love her. And one of the best ways to truly learn to love someone is to learn them. And that doesn't necessarily just happen in the first year or so. You're constantly learning them because we all grow and partially change, no doubt, over the years anyway. So we're constantly looking for that. And a man should love to do that rather than this cop-out that's so often used, who can understand the mind of a woman? I don't hear it much anymore, but I know it's still out there. Because the ultimate, if you could conclude the thought there, who can understand the mind of a woman? Nobody, so why try? And then just laugh about it. It's amazing the things people will laugh about that should never be laughed at. They're not funny. They're belittled. We honor the marriage relationship because it is God's structure. It is his organization, his institution, and the family along with it. And then hopefully the other benefits, which can be many, come out of it. It is a wonderful thing to have a close marriage, a loving relationship. It is wonderful. It has responsibilities in it, but we like doing it. I mean, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't a husband love the idea of continually loving his wife, improving it, getting chances to prove it, to give himself? I understand we get used to each other. It doesn't have to mean, well, we just don't have the romance anymore and we just stare into each other's eyes constantly or whatever. That's okay. I think we cheapen the idea of what love is in our idea of what romance is. Just so many different things you can work at to demonstrate that and continue to do it as you grow old together and hopefully look forward to it in the whole process of this. That it's a wonderful thing, especially the whole concept there of marrying your best friend, as we've stressed before. So point B, underneath that, the contrast to this love would be when the husband becomes embittered against her. Embittered. I'm very interested in what this word is here. It's pikrino, describing one that's irritated. That's not a surprise, but that irritated is very important for us to remember. He's irritated, exasperated. there's where irritations get to a point where they just give up. They're just frustrated, and I don't want to deal with it anymore. I might have an explosive temper. Might not ever have that, but it just exasperated. I'm to my end. I've allowed myself to get to my end because she just frustrates me all the time. And again, we have to follow this thought. It doesn't take much psychological insight to figure that out. Why do certain people irritate me? I know the very first answer to that is because I'm too focused on me. I'm too focused. Again, I go back to the petty little things that bother us. We're the ones that are petty. It's amazing how many people will say, I have some things that just really bother me. I don't like hearing knuckles cracked. I can't, it's just horrible to me to hear it. Am I going to sever friendships because of it? I haven't yet. But it just, okay, I don't like it. I don't like to hear it. I don't like hearing people crack their knuckles. Some of my family do. Tammy lovingly doesn't. I don't know if she does it anymore. Maybe she does, and I don't have to know about it. It's always in secret. But, others. But I'm not going to sever relationships over these things. We don't do that. It would be so petty. Imagine how you have to devalue someone else when you become embittered at them and so overly value your own self. Again, we all get this. It's not just in the husband relationship with his wife. It's with brothers and sisters. Does anyone remember if you had, brothers and sisters, that bitterness against them? I just can't stand them. Yeah, it's not permissible. We're so focused on ourselves. That bothers me. That's not agreeable to me. That doesn't encourage me. See, me is the indicator there of what's going on. And a husband that's embittered with his wife is a man who's focused on himself. And what a weak man he is. What a weak man he is, because in his primary earthly responsibility to his wife to give himself for her, he will let himself neglect his responsibility because poor little me doesn't have everything he wants. Little things bother me. What a horrible thing. I mean, man, if you could think about it, what a horrible thing for a man to indicate to his wife, you bother me. What an irritant you are. I had a man in my office some years ago that was very neglectful of his wife. And there were several indications that he came in and wanted to talk, so we were talking, and I went up to him, or I was getting frustrated with the guy. The guy was very stubborn. And so finally I just looked at him and said, if your wife was sitting in here, and I went over and I slapped her in the face, what would you do? I'd deck you. I beat you to a bloody pulp. He was very angry instantly. He said, but that's what you're doing. Not physically, but it's exactly what you're doing. You'd beat me up, but you're having yourself doing it, and you think it's just fine because she bothers you or doesn't respect you. I didn't say this, but again, what a weak man you are. Very weak man. And hopefully men find that offensive. I'm saying that on purpose to be somewhat, hopefully, reasonably offensive to a man, because typically a man wants to be masculine and wants to be tough and disciplined in himself, at least likes to imagine that's the way he is, and yet he shows the opposite when it comes to his wife, the one he is primarily responsible to protect and to care for. Where has that gone? Too much self-focus. Don't be embittered. Don't be irritated. Don't be the point where because of these irritations you're exasperated, you're angry, you begrudge her. She is not to be treated as a subject in her subjection to him. That's a great point. I didn't come up with it. It was mentioned several times in some of the resources I was reading, some of the commentaries. She is to be subject to him, but he better never treat her like she's a subject, like he's king of the house. I mean, here it is, woman, you are to be in subjection to me, so clearly you are my subject, and I will treat you as such. You are beneath me. Structurally, she is under your authority, which means any leader is a servant to those he leads. And those he leads, he is a protector to, one who cares for them. He takes on the bulk of the responsibilities to protect her and to take the stresses of life as much as he can off of her. because he loves her. Not just because he always feels that emotional side of love. Again, that will come if you truly love your wife. But because he's supposed to do it. That's a wonderful thing, even if she's not always appreciative, especially when she's not appreciative. Why would a man put a price tag on it? Well, I've been doing this for some time, and I haven't heard her thank you recently. Do you need to have a thank you, men? Really? Do you need it? Or can't you just take true pleasure? I meet this. I love my wife. And even when she's not appreciative, not that I'm thinking of it, or, she's just having a super rough time, I'm not focused on it. I get to take more of the pressure on. That's what a man wants. You put the pressure. If any pressure is going to come on my family, it's going to come on me. If there's going to be stresses or dislike or antagonism against my family, it's going to come on me, right? That sounds like a man, doesn't it? Not that we're trying to stir it up and make it happen, but yes, that's what a man would, rather than, she'd take care of it. She's the one that's messed up. She's the one with the bad attitude. She's the one that's not grateful. Let her suffer. Where do men ever get this type of mentality? I've seen it a lot, or they'll laugh about their wives. I've often talked about it, but sadly it's the case. A lot of men just pleased with themselves as much as they can be, that they don't actually listen to their wives. I think it's funny. It goes on, talk. I don't listen to it. I don't listen for a couple key words, as though somehow that's a skill. No, you don't cherish her. You'd want to know what she thinks. And therefore be kind of glad that she talks. Maybe even a lot, so that you can find these things out if you pay attention. Don't treat her as a subject and her subjugation to you. If he thinks himself above her in quality, she is likely to be viewed as a bother. A man thinks he's the better part of the marriage. She's the lucky one. What a horrible thought process that would be. Be wonderful if a man could think back and think, I think if anyone's the lucky one, it's me. Imagine finding a woman, beautiful woman, that would marry me. That's how a man ought to think. I am so privileged to have this. Never thinking that I just brought the better part to this marriage. I don't mind it sometimes when men say, oh no, she's the better half. I kind of think, well, good that a man would think along those lines. Hopefully the wife doesn't agree, but that's a whole nother category. But that, there's just that he understands it. He never feels like he was truly worthy of her. That's a wonderful concept for a man to remember. Sometimes men forget how desperate they were that some girl might even like him. And imagine that one suddenly did. And then of all things, wonder of wonders, marries him. That ought to keep a man focused for the rest of his life. That is a huge privilege that a woman in great faith would marry him and put herself under him as the Lord has set up for the rest of her life. That ought to be something that drives a man constantly, never forgets it. And he's always grateful for her for doing that. Even when she's not always, just in awe of you. No man needs that. He may want it at times, but he doesn't need it. Point C, the husband is, because of his true love for her, to sacrifice for her, back there in Ephesians, especially 5, give himself for her. Instead, many husbands become impatient or even degrading of their wives because of the needs she has, yet he in love, in other words, he just degrades her because she still has needs of growth that he happens to have seen or inconsistencies that maybe he has seen or something like that, yet he in love is supposed to long to meet these things. He's supposed to long. So your wife has some weaknesses in some area. Maybe she's not super organized. So what do? I fortunately don't suffer with that. Tammy's very organized. I am the way less organized person in this relationship here. So, but let's just say the wife's not super organized. What do? Come on, woman, you're supposed to run this house. Do I have to do it all for you? You see these responses as though somehow that's an acceptable thing. Pardon my strong terminology here, but what a jerk that man is. What an idiot he would be to do something like that. To come in, we'll help her out. Maybe she will, maybe she won't. Imagine living in a home the rest of your life that's not super organized. Now, for some of you, this is about to become extremely offensive, but here's my initial answer to it. Big deal. So what? So what? You can live with that. You care for her, you cherish her, so she's not the most organized. In these, well, then come alongside and protect her in it. Help her with it. Be a part of the process there. Of course, then it's a wonderful thing when neither one of you is organized. Well, then, you should probably get along just fine. And then the wonder and the fun of every day is trying to find where things are at. We can look on things from differing perspectives. Most people think, I could never do that. Yeah, you could. Yeah, you could. Just always jump back to my ridiculous illustration. If someone was going to try to torture you and get you to recant on something or whatever, what would they use? And I guarantee a messy room hopefully would not make any of us crack. So yes, we can, because the person's more important than everything else. And that ought to be what drives a man in the right way. He's supposed to long to meet these needs, not begrudge her because of these things. That she is the weaker vessel in so many other ways. We won't go into the details. We've dealt with that in 1 Peter already. So man should to think, great, that's why I'm here. I am her protector, and certainly one of the things I want to protect are her feelings. There's nothing wrong with that. That's exactly one of the reasons why we're there. Protect her feelings. Protect her heart. That's just what we want to be, the barrier there with these things. If given the privilege of being in a marriage, this love is more than romance. So your wife may love having candy and flowers or something like that, but it better be more than that. It better be so much more than that. Off to the left, so many of what are to be the basic, gracious responses we are to have with each other, supporting and encouraging each other, are hindered by painful, energy-draining obstacles that have become normal in Christian families. Of course, we argue. I hear people say, I'm going to overdo this the rest of my days every chance I get. Husbands, of course we argue. I just wish I could get them in a room and say, what's wrong with you? What do you mean, of course you argue? Who in their right mind would think that it's okay for a husband and wife to argue? I know that goes against normal way of thinking. No. Why are we allowed to do this? Why do we think we're allowed to do this? This type of arguing is one of the most unloving things that anyone ever does, and yet it's considered normal. Husband and his wife, well, of course they argue. Why? Let's cut to the chase then. Why? I guarantee the me is the issue. The me. Well, yeah, she's always, no, not allowed to go there. Again, why I'd go bankrupt if I ever had a counseling institution and I had to live off of it. Because, no, you're not allowed. Well, easier said than done. Well, you'd better do it. You're not allowed to do this. And you get used to arguing, and it just becomes commonplace. I guarantee you there's embitterment there. I guarantee it. And a man would think, well, of course I have to argue her down. I know I'm right. She thinks she's always right. But I know I'm right in this. I mean, I've got the facts on my side, and she never wants to hear the facts. I can lay out my organization in this argument perfectly. And she just never seems to, sometimes she just cries. What kind of man are you? Why would you be that way? Let's say she's 100% wrong. What's your response supposed to be? You were 100% wrong before your Creator. What did He do? He's the example in the Lord Jesus Christ being sent on our behalf. So no, man, there's no way out of it. Not that we would want any way out of it. Doesn't a real man, want to demonstrate his love for his wife that she's, let's say, having a really hard time in life? Which women will have. That's not a surprise. And there's just sometimes things are just very difficult and she's not always happy and cheerful and whatever. But a man would think, well, that's what I'm here for. I'll help keep her steady and secure in this. That's what a man ought to be. We do not want these things to become normal because that embitterment is what comes on the other side. And that has become too commonly accepted. Where most people will realize, yeah, especially our children then, Our parents aren't crazy about each other, that we know. Oh, yeah, that we know. I mean, I respect that they stay together. And I suppose there is some respectability there. They're at least honoring that part before God. But there's just yielding to the point that you don't have to have or you're never going to have a really close marriage. I just think that's faithless. That's faithless. And not close marriage because the other's going to finally get their act together. You and I are going to get our act together. What are my responsibilities? And I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Even if the other person never responds. Because I do it before the Lord. It's pleasing in His sight, which is the reason why children are told to obey their parents. Children are told to obey their parents because it's pleasing to the Lord, not because, things will go well with them. That is also included in the commandments. That it may be well with you and you may live long upon the earth. That's certainly a great motivator, I suppose, for children. But primarily because it's before the Lord, it's pleasing. It's His organization. How often when we allow ourselves to become disgruntled, even embittered in these relationships that He set up in His structure, are we actually criticizing God? What a mess. Why did you set this up? Why did you structure it this way? Our society loves it. I mean, look how society's trying everything it can do to redefine the family or just do away with family altogether, redefine marriage, redefine even the sexuality as far as male and female. They've tried to redefine all of this, anything to go against God's norm. And sadly, a lot of Christians, at least in their attitude, agree with it. Maybe not in their word or their philosophy, but in their attitude they do. I would imagine the horror of horrors. What if you found a homosexual couple that seemed happier than a heterosexual couple? What are you going to do with that? Can't argue against that, they say. Yeah, we can. Because the main objective is not happiness. The main objective is obedience and faith to God's structure, and in so doing, we find then the right reason for happiness. I'm not saying there's not happiness. It's probably the fullest, most fulfilling happiness anyone could ever have is when we are doing it for the right reason. And then when things change, which will happen when we're not having our best day, the other person is responding in faith, and what a wonderful relationship that is. There's the two are better than one. I know it's not meant just for a marriage, but I oftentimes think of that marriage when one falls down, the other's there to help them back up. And if we're both about to fall, we lean on each other. It's how it ought to be seen, the marriage relationship, rather than what it's become, even in our churches. Something almost laughable at times, and I mean in a bad way, when we see it's just not there anymore. It's a rare find, but every once in a while you still see it, and people will call it cute. When an old couple still seem to be really taken with each other. That, I'll admit, warms my heart. I love to see things like that. I love it. And it's not an act to get to that age. Who needs to put on an act? They truly love each other. And what an example it is to children. And in what an example that will be to grandchildren. Like, certainly one of the reasons why I want to be married is to have that. I would want to have that. That would be such a beautiful thing. Rather than the common thing. You just wait, you get married. Oh, it's nice at first. Honeymoon will be over, though, and wait for real life to kick in. And you won't be so enamored. But imagine if we had couples that demonstrated the opposite of that. Imagine if we had that. I hope it's not imagined. We'd better have it. It's just a point of obedience, this whole thing where we allow it just to be known that we're a husband and wife and we don't get along. That is disobedience before God. Again, easy one here. It's so succinct here, and Ephesians 5 would be the other. Dan?
So when a couple is married, which you just described at first, that's easy. That just kind of happens because of all the emotional woo.
Yes. Good way to describe it, too.
But if it was easy for the rest of the time, this statement would not have had to been made. If that woo just kept going until you died, this passage would never have to be written.
And we'd never...
It had to be written because the honeymoon does pass. The enamorment, the emotional does pass. becomes work. I mean, and I don't mean work as in tedious necessarily or difficult. I mean something you have to keep focusing on.
Right. It's like anything else in life that's worth having. You invest in it. An investment takes effort, deliberate effort, but I just, you don't get a better opportunity to prove love than when, things might get a little bit more difficult.
So my teaching job, I hear these students all the time. Well, yeah, but then I won't be talking about hating school and work. Yeah, but then I'm doing what I want to do. Yeah, and I guarantee you what you want to do will get old after a while. And I guarantee you that there will be days in the what you want to do job where you're just forcing yourself. So it's not just marriage. It's kind of a fact of life.
Right, in everything.
The same old thing, day after day after day, year after year after year, becomes the same old thing, and somewhere along the way it starts to require a conscious effort. Some days, and I'm thinking of work, not my wife.
Yes. Appreciate the clarification.
A conscious effort sometimes to remember to do what you're supposed to do, and to remember that this is actually what you want.
Yes.
Even though at this particular moment, you may have had a parent rip on you or something, and you don't really feel like it.
Right. You stay with it, and it is so worth it. And to the point, I can just speak from my own vantage point, and I don't think it's that we're just exceptional people, but I love being married. I love being married. It really, from my vantage point, it hasn't been hard. I don't know how else to say it. It just hasn't been, and I believe a good reason for that isn't that we're just exceptional people. I think Tammy is, but I know I'm not necessarily exceptional, but is how we both were brought to the marriage relationship when we were young and what we were taught. We know we're all in. Neither one of us thought, until death do you part. Oh no, we're chained in, and this is going to be such a stress. It's such a dreadful thing. We couldn't wait for it. And then once you're in, you realize there are no other options. We're going to make the best of this. And it's fun. Are there challenges once in a while? Yeah, but it's just never been that big a deal. It really hasn't. And I don't think that's exceptional. I think it's all a matter of perspective. Because if a man allows himself to be irritated and bothered by his wife, given enough time, it's going to be a rift there and tension and conflict. And then they get used to it. And that becomes the norm. Because I hate to oversimplify it, and I'd love to get back this to a norm. I don't really think there's that much work to have a good marriage. I just don't think there is. I think we make it work because of things we allow that we shouldn't have, but it's just not that hard. Not if your focus is right. Well, what if they irritate you? Well, it's going to happen. But I just don't think about it. I'm going to be irritating. What makes me think of Tammy's irritations to me are exceptional? I know I've got to be irritating, and I'm sure glad she just overlooks it, and I've never sensed that she hasn't. So this is just kind of the way it is. Of course, we're two human beings. There's going to be issues, but they're not issues. It's kind of loving to just overlook these things, and they're not a big deal because we love the other person. Okay?
Well, there's this thing about irritations. I'm talking in a biological sense, not in a marriage sense, although I think the extension applies, which is why I'm saying this. So, I've noticed several cases in my life. The first case I noticed, it was in college. I had chemistry lab right before chapel, and 2 or 3 times I burnt myself a little bit on my hands. And in chapel we had theater seats with metal backs. And my finger would be hurt, and I'd push it against the metal, cool metal, and it would feel better, and I'd take it off and it'd start hurting, and I'd push it again. And I noticed that if I would just stop trying to make the irritation go away, did I forget about it? That the nerves would quit being stimulated. Well, actually, they would overstimulate to the point of shutting down for a while.
I always wondered what was going on, but okay.
But,
Yes.
But it is true, you know, don't scratch that mosquito bite. Why? Because the more you scratch it, the worse it gets.
Right.
And that's, I think the same thing is true with irritations in life. The more we focus on the irritation, the worse it gets. And the best thing to do in many cases is
don't dwell on it.
Again, not to think about it.
Absolutely. That's a great illustration. Yeah, you scratch that mosquito bite, and it's only going to get worse. You focus on that irritation, it's only going to get worse. And no doubt, you've magnified something that if we could somehow be objective with ourselves, we wouldn't be embarrassed to look back and think, I let that little thing that irritated me become a big issue. What a child. How immature is that? And yet it's common. Everybody expects it. No doubt people sometimes when they're talking about their spouses with other people, they'll bring these little things up, irritations, and laugh and chuckle and how funny it is and what an irritant they are. Just, we don't realize we're actually mocking God when we do that, not our spouse. We are mocking our spouse, no doubt, but we're mocking God. We're defying God when we do these things. It's way more serious than people let on. And that's why I believe there's so many other books out there to kind of come up with another way to approach it, because nobody wants to say, you're having an issue, you yourself are having an issue in your relationship there because you have an issue with God. You have a character flaw that you're not dealing with, and God has perfectly placed you together. One of the reasons why is for you to get over this and you to grow up and you to mature in your faith, not to somehow hope that the other person gets their act together. Ever thought about what a wonderful design of how God uses marriage to grow us into what we ought to be? And oftentimes he'll use these things that are irritants to us. And young people, I don't want to make it sound like it's just a commonplace. They don't have to be. If you're just not, like Dan said, if you're just not dwelling on it, you're never think, are you really irritated with your wife? What was the guy that can think, I got 10 right off the top of my head? Then you've been thinking all wrong. Hope you'd have to stop. No, I don't have an irritation with my wife. I imagine, you might tell me some things I ought to focus on, but no, I'm just, no, they're not there. She probably has some irritations, but me, better to think that way. Well, I've got to get to the next point here. We've got a few minutes left, fortunately. Children obey, and in their obligation to obey, there's two verses tied together here for a good reason. Children obey. This is pleasing in the sight of the Lord. And fathers, while your children are working on obeying you, don't make it hard. Don't exasperate them. That's easy for fathers to do. And it's to fathers. Well, I've seen so many commentary. Well, moms ought to do this too. Well, I agree, but it's not directed at the moms. It's directed at the fathers. Even though the commentaries, so many of them fall over themselves. Well, it means both parents. Then it would have said it. Not that a mom can't exasperate children also. But this is given particularly to fathers. As your children are obeying and looking to obey for the right reasons, fathers, don't you come in and make it harder on them to do it. Don't frustrate them in it. In the process, it's hard to do it, and ought you to be in law enforcement, and you ought to hold them accountable and make sure the obedience is a major focus? Absolutely. And the man ought to be, in my perspective, the primary disciplinarian, the one that ultimately, if they're not going to cooperate, the man is the one who is the executor of the punishment, not the executor, but the executor of the punishment, ultimately, that the child will hopefully dread for the right reason. But the father won't browbeat their child and then rob them of their heart because they don't lose heart. No dad should ever allow him to get to that point. A father, especially, should be pleasable somehow and is looking to find something to be pleased with their child as they progress. One of the common mistakes many fathers have is they so expect and try to push their children into obedience, into achievement, which are all good things, but they're never pleasable. And they don't understand. Maybe they have forgotten. Again, many of us can think back one of my driving desires as a boy was to please my dad. I wanted to impress him. I just wanted him to be impressed with something. And when he was, it was like, oh, I can live off that. When you just get a comment in passing sometimes. I don't even know if sometimes he thought about it. To say, oh, I really like that. That's really good. It was just, oh, my heart almost exploded. Now, I'm a bit more melancholy than most, I suppose, but I just loved it. That suddenly he was genuinely pleased with something. And even when I disappointed him, my dad had a knack for this. When he would discipline, he was very severe in his attitude and seriousness and discipline. But when discipline was done, he was good at making sure there's no rift here. It's been taken care of. I really do care for you and truly want the best for you in so many different ways. He would communicate that after discipline. Before it, he was the executioner as far as we were concerned. It was the most dreaded thing ever. I was terrified. My dad never beat us or anything, but boy, he sure made the process leading up to it terrifying. And then when it was done, I never walked away thinking, well, we'll never be able to talk again, even when I severely disappointed him, even when I allowed my attitude to get really bad and I knew I was defiant and I was really bad. He had every right to just write me off. What an attitude I allowed to show my dad. But he didn't. And that's a wonderful thing for we as men, if God blesses us with children, that will always be part of our objective. My children must obey. I understand that. But I will show them the path to it and give them proper insight. Our children don't know for flattering, by the way. Don't ever fall prey to flattering because you get so desperate. They'll always find something genuinely praiseworthy. Genuine, but you got to be looking for it. There's where so much of the work comes. You're genuinely looking for things so you never flatter your children because no child wants to be flattering. Well, you're just saying that so you'll just make me feel better artificially. No, they'll know, mostly, I think, if we're genuine. Number one, children are to literally listen to heed. When it says obey, that's a very interesting Greek word, prefix and a word. Hoop akuo. Hoop akuo. Some of you know akuo. That wouldn't be where we get our word acoustics, would it? And the answer, yes, it is. But in verb form, it just means to hear. But hoop, what are we talking about there? Under. To hear or listen underneath someone. So a child realizes I'm hearing something, I'm listening to something, but I'm looking up because the one I'm listening to is above me in their authority. There's the word picture there. I understand that. Children should never look on it as, oh, mom and dad and I, equal plane. I'll listen to you once in a while. I'll give you a... No. In the structure as God designed it, you are under your parents. And when you hear, when you listen, you are listening underneath. That's the word picture there. That's obey, interestingly enough. I love that word picture. I'm listening to heed to someone who's above me in structure. God's structure in authority. Not because they're always the most brilliant. Sometimes God will give parents a super smart child. And sometimes they're very difficult to deal with because in some areas they might think, I noticed you use bad grammar there, Father. Not that would be a common issue, but let's just use my lame example there and think, you really messed up there. You're not that smart, are you? So often it's assumed that this takes place in teenage years. I think it starts before that, where children will do that. But they won't listen underneath because they'll look for some way to even the playing field and then hopefully someday be smarter than their parents, be better than their parents, so they can disregard their parents, forgetting the fundamental fact God gave them their parents. And God is never wrong. Well, but he didn't know the parent. No, on purpose, God gave you the parents you were given. No doubt, to form that character, to put that pride back in place where it belongs, to get us properly humbled and properly motivated, and to learn to obey. It's often stated, practically speaking, that children need to learn to obey their parents because ultimately ultimately that will have some influence on their perspective of God. And a lot of people say, well, that's the parents ought to take heed to that, and they should. But children ought to take heed to that too. Because we might think, well, my parents sometimes just don't make any sense. Do you ever think that there's going to be times in life where we're not going to have God figured out? Oh, way more than your parents. And He's all authoritative. So there's an aspect of faith there as well, that children obey their parents. And at the core of that is faith. The core of that is faith. They actually trust this. God gave me these parents. And even if I can spot what appears to me to be a flaw in their thinking, imagine that, especially when we start getting into our teenage years and things start to click, and we start to think I perceive a flaw in their thinking. And I might even be right. But it never is an excuse to disobey. Because certainly there's going to be times when we think we found a flaw in God. And we'll always be wrong there. So we'd better learn it, because even at the very initial point, we obey our parents. We hear underneath as a result of pleasing God. The first essential part of obedience is listening in a submissive spirit. We certainly hupakuo under God. We're listening under God in all of our life. As the underlying word pictures, they need to learn and live as those under authority, the authority given by God. So I see my parents, but I'm always looking past my parents at the God who set them over me. And there's where my thinking must remain. The God who gave me my parents. So children that start to allow themselves to develop an attitude against their parents are developing an attitude against the God that gave them to you. And there's the worst problem. That's the worst of all. You obey your parents because in the sight of God, it is right. It is the right thing to do. And it even has those words, in all things, in all categories, in all these situations in life. Listen underneath them as being someone who's under authority. Off to the left, since our parents are from the Lord, then it is well-pleasing to Him when they are obeyed. Top of the next page, the concept of obedience to parents, both father and mother, is frequent throughout the Scripture. Exodus 20:12, Exodus 21:17. Then there's Proverbs 1:8, listening and heeding the counsel that is given by the parents. Proverbs 20:20, and then one of my favorites, I was reading this morning, and I think it was Sarah that said that Isaac Watts, got that one wrong. Isaac Watts wrote a song, I suppose, for children based on this. Proverbs 30, verse 17. Maybe we should put this one on our walls. It says, "The eye that mocks a father and scorns a mother, the ravens of the valley will pick it out, and the young eagles will eat it." Now, there's a picture right in Proverbs. Some people never make it probably to chapter 30. But there it is, trying to demonstrate, oh no, it's just not a wise thing. That's quite the warning. I would be interested to maybe hear that song if we could ever get a copy of it. Then maybe down in the children's class, they can start singing that song and sing it for a special. Imagine the horror of parents as their kids get up and start singing that song. It's right out of Scripture. There it is. It's a serious thing, I suppose, and that's what's trying to be communicated there, though it is startling to us to hear things like this. Off to the left of that, disobedience to parents is one of the listed sins in particular, of those in a society that cast off God. Romans 1:30. It's one of the listings of sins that are a result of a reprobate mind, a pseudo mind that no longer is thinking correctly because it's disregarded God. It is one of the results on a society that comes because of that. Children do not obey their parents. Now, that's probably not in one of our lists of perversions. Imagine someone, could you list some perversions that are out there? Most of them would be in the sexual immorality side of things, but I wonder how many of us would list in our list of perversions in a society, children not obeying their parents, but it is. It is. It's one of the results of a reprobate mind, of a society, of a people that cast off God, push down God, suppress the truth and unrighteous consistently through their lives, that one of the results is disobedience to parents. It's to a point now where it is commonly expected by society, so much so that you would think that it's now reversed. Parents, obey your children. For in society, this is right. I think we could almost come up with a verse like that that's going on. The children are now looking to, in every possible turn, obey their children. They may not put it that way, but keep their children happy, please their children. Perish the thought that I would ever disappoint my child and not live up to their expectations. Oh, we're going to constantly disappoint them there. I would even venture, it would need explanation, which I'm not going to give, but would venture to say part of the job responsibility will somehow involve disappointing your children. That's one of the signs that you're getting, where you ought to be. This is encountering the next point that's coming, where we are not to exasperate our children, but absolutely, we are going to contradict our children quite often, especially while they're young. And if we are consistent enough in this and doing it correctly while they're young, they will not really have to take place as they get older, or they'll become few and far between. That was a great lesson I learned growing up. Deal with it consistently, all the time when they're very little. And then when they're old, which could be, 7, 8, 9, you got them pretty much in line. Is that doable? Absolutely. Well, some children, maybe if you have enough, demonstrate. No, sometimes even then every once in a while test the boundaries. Yeah, sure. But you generally have it all worked out because of the consistency while they're very little. Trying to work them, not again browbeating them, not beating them, but disciplining them, which is very strategic and very on purpose in how it's done, leading them along to that obedience. Because my children hopefully will want to live long upon the earth, but I as a parent kind of want them to live long upon the earth. Even the Proverbs go to the point where if you beat your child, you will save their soul from hell, is the Old English translation there. It's a big deal in how we come at this. Point C, the in all things scope of this obedience must be in keeping with well-pleasing to the Lord. But I don't think that's going to come up as much as sometimes children might say. I think my parents are disobeying God in telling me what to do. And if you could somehow get to the truth in there, it's just because they don't like what their parents are telling them to do. But it truly is whatever is well-pleasing to the Lord also, though if one has unbelieving parents, they, the children, must still seek to obey in all things unless it's truly defiant of the Lord, truly sinful, immoral, or unlawful, which rarely would happen. It's amazing how people want to jump to the exception. Well, what if your parents tell you to kill your sibling? People just jump to these ridiculous things out there to somehow quickly find the fastest way to find a crack in the rule, so then they can just open the whole thing up and soon you don't have a rule left. That is so common to humanity, and yet it's so wrong. So definitely very wrong. Point D, Paul includes the truth, this obedience, that this is well-pleasing to the Lord. I love, again, this one. I know sometimes I may sound like I'm geeking out on some of these things, but ourestos, which you're probably thinking, yeah, I'm sorry, just doesn't get me. But what's interesting is if you get to the second part of that, the ourestos has the idea of pleasing. But Paul didn't just say ourestos. It's pleasing to the Lord. He said it's ourestos. And what does the prefix eu, epsilon, upsilon in the Greek mean? It means good. Good, pleasing. That's it's a double positive. Oh no, this isn't just pleasing. This is very pleasing to the Lord. Children, when you obey your parents. Very pleasing to the Lord. And usually we could think, well, when it's difficult to obey my parents, that would be a great motivator because this is very pleasing to the Lord, because not only is it just obedience, but it's clearly a demonstration of faith. And don't we want our little children to even start learning what faith is? I'm doing it because I trust God. I trust God. Can our little children learn that? Absolutely. They can learn that. Not, children, you obey us because we're smarter than you. A lot of parents come that way. Or you obey us because we're your boss. That's true, and that's kind of part of the reason, but there's more than that. There's more than that, and we want them to know that. You do it because it's pleasing to the Lord. It's one of the earliest memory verses I ever remember learning. I had to have been maybe 5. Remember my dad making us learn certain verses. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. It's one of the first ones I remember learning. So why obey your parents? Because before God, it's right. That's your first reason. Now, ought the parents to be smarter and have a better perspective and help save your little life from death? Absolutely. Or from making ridiculous mistakes? Absolutely. But those are all secondary. You do it because it's right in the eyes of Almighty God. It is His structure. It is His organization, not ours. We're in it. All of us were part of a family to some degree. We all were born. We all had physical parents, and we all had, something, but they may be best or not or whatever. There could be all kinds of varying things out there, but the family structure, the marriage structure is God's. And we treat it with the respect it deserves. Not we take our perspectives into the marriage or our perspectives into the family, and then we run it based upon that. That's always dangerous type of thinking, to somehow think that that's legitimate. It's not. We'll finish this up and then get to the whole specific command to the fathers not to exasperate their children. And then we're going to get to one that it's going to be a bit uncomfortable. The servants before their masters, the slaves before their masters, which to some degree, sooner or later, we all are in most of our lives. So we'll build on that starting next week. Let's pray. Father, thank you for such direct statements, such clear commands that are given to us. You, of course, know infinitely better than all of us the reasons for these things, and yet let us take the simplicity of them, the directness of them, and then obey, submit, believe, and trust without question. We trust you against our own natural inclinations. Please, Father, let us never lose sight of these relationships that you've placed us in, that you've allowed us to be a part of, are yours, and that is the primary thought that dictates then how we respond in them. It's, of course, by your grace that these things will happen, and certainly the truth of your word that gives us the direction in them. We thank you for it all. In Jesus' name, amen.